what if we weren't trying to get rid of it? We were just trying to relate to it differently.
Well, welcome.
Thank
Here we
you.
go.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely
Yeah,
to be here.
yeah, same for me. It's pretty special, actually, to get to see you in this context after such a long time.
Decades.
Fascinating. See, I want to. We talked a little bit about it on the phone yesterday, but I want to hear more about what you've been up to, what your path has been, and how it's brought you to what you're doing now. Mm-hmm.
There's always so many ways in. I love talking about my path. It's fun actually to reflect on. I was like noticing my like when you asked that question, I got a big smile on my face because it's um, the last few years of finding coaching and finding trauma work and doing a lot of what I've been doing has been so fulfilling, and I'm so proud of it.
So, working with trauma, why do you think you've been drawn to that?
Yeah, well, I started, going through a coach training program with the Coactive Training Institute. And I was very inspired by one of their principles, which is presence or process coaching, which is really about like being with the other person. So you're not there for them, you're not trying to help them, you're not, giving them advice, but really just present with them and allowing them to have their experience of whatever emotion might be coming up. And it really touched me. It was actually a very quite emotional course for me. And it was just 1 and 5. And after that, I started doing a lot of study into, um, this idea of we don't have to fix people, we can just be with them. And what would it be like to give people an opportunity to just be in their experience without having to change it? And so I kind of became fascinated by that. And then I had some friends and mentors who were a part of the NARM Training Institute. And so I went and did the NARM basics training. So NARM is the neuroaffective relational model. And it was like just a continuation of that idea of like, what is it to be with someone, and how are you relating to the things that have happened to you, as opposed to tell me the story of what happened to you.
Yeah.
Every time I talk about it, every time I hear the words come out of my mouth, it's like, oh yeah, why aren't we doing that more? Like not just in the coaching container, but just in life, that whole being with instead of being for. We can't ever really be there for someone, right? Like they're there for themselves, but we can be there with someone as they're experiencing the world.
I'm curious about that too. A couple months ago, I arrived in Austin a couple months ago, and 3 days after I arrived, there was a good friend of mine had a huge domestic crisis where his partner left with his child, and I didn't have to. I was there for him and watching him have a panic attack after panic attack all night. And I have a lot of wisdom in me. I have a lot of good things to say. I have a lot of tricks, all sorts of bag of tricks, psychologically, spiritually, ontologically, all these things to say. And it got to a point where it's like none of it was working. And I just had to be there in this. Even for me, it was heavy just to be there. It was traumatic for me just to be there with him, and I was at a loss. Um, my brain didn't know what to do with that, and still doesn't know what to do. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, because all I could do was be present while he suffered.
It's interesting just hearing you say, all I could do, as in like that was it. And meanwhile, that feels like everything. Like you said, it was traumatic for you even to be with him in that. So it's not something we take lightly to be present with someone in a really difficult experience, right? In their deep suffering. Like that's a really big thing even to to just be with them, right? I'm using the just kind of lightly because I think
Yeah.
that's actually a huge thing. I think there's something to be said for um, how intense it feels to feel like we have to do something differently to make ourselves feel better. Like if
Mhm.
I don't like that, we call it like shitting on ourselves, right? Like, well, I need to like, get up and stop crying or stop panicking or not feel this way. Like it's dangerous for me to be in this panic attack. I have to stop. And really, it's our body having some big experience of processing. And so
Mhm.
how difficult is it to allow ourselves to just be human in those moments?
The being human thing is ironically difficult for a quote unquote, I'll say, how about us, someone who identifies as being spiritual.
Yeah,
Spiritual identity is an ego.
right.
I consider myself to be spiritual. Well, that's different than being spiritual. And to be human means that I have to admit that all my uh, spirituality uh, is powerless in the face of reality, right? And that's difficult. So, right, and the term spiritual bypass. Like, well, that's one thing I'll do is try to spiritual bypass, and I'll try all these tricks. So I just noticed my own mind doesn't want to be in the suffering. It wants to make something of it, or at least even spiritualize it, or have a story about the suffering, or just the moment there of the trauma. Um, and yeah, so slippery. And I think other people probably would go to their own drug, which might be literal drugs. It might be exercise. It might be who knows. But I just noticed that here I am, uh, a deeply spiritually identified person, and yet I have my drug, and I do not want to be with reality when the going gets tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I there's something, in our nervous system that says like any type of negativity or any type of negative emotion, negative, I want to use quotes with that, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
don't consider
Mm-hmm.
emotions to be negative or positive, but
Mm-hmm.
those those traumatic experiences are the things that our nervous system wants to escape from or run away. Like we see somebody that gets really angry and we go, oh, I can't be with that. Like that's dangerous, right? Or somebody that's sobbing or in deep panic or deep sadness, like that's really like we say, oh, like you need to go in the other room. Like there's this kind of like wanting to separate from it, right? That's maybe a little
Yeah.
old school, but like I think there's been a narrative in our society for a long time that's like if you're having an experience like grief or anger, like, you know, in Western culture, we're told to sort of like have it alone.
Yes.
Like go and separate and like get through it as quickly as possible because nobody wants to be around you if you're in that. And that's a really dangerous narrative because we're essentially fragmenting our human experience then and saying that one way to be is better than another. And the
Mm-hmm.
human condition says that we're going to experience all of these things, in an ebb and flow throughout our lives. And so I find that having compassion and acceptance for these really hard experiences we go through for the suffering brings a lot more levity to our
Mm.
human experience.
The irony is to heal your thing, whatever your thing is to actually accept it. Just being present with it, as you say, adds levity.
Yeah, that's really interesting and beautiful. I kind of giggled when you repeated back that levity word because it's so ironic, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
these heavy things would, like accepting of the heavy things would actually bring us more levity. And I think that there's something, I used the metaphor, I think I used it with you yesterday or last time we chatted that of the Chinese finger trap, where you
Mm-hmm.
put your finger in and when you're pulling away from whatever it is, you get stuck in that space. And when you lean in to connect to whatever it is that you're experiencing, there's release.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. Right. It would take courage if you're looking at bottom, or what looks like to be bottom, or maybe it's bottomless. That suffering. Um, yeah. What encouragement would you have to just let yourself fall down it?
Yeah. And at what point do you at what point do you look to see if if there are walls that you want to climb, you know? Because I think there's that experience of we allow ourselves to be at the bottom because that's where we are. That's what's happening in that moment. And then at some point we look and there's walls and we think, oh, now would be an interesting time to climb that wall.
Yeah.
And so there's this sort of like allowing the present. I think I just keep coming back to presence with this, like what's here now. And even what I was saying in the beginning about process coaching and how that's like the stereotypical word for that we always joke about in that course. It's what's here now,
Mm.
what's happening for you now. And
Mm-hmm.
just sort of like allowing, you know, maybe it takes a minute, maybe it takes a day, maybe it takes a year, and you're just allowing yourself to be present in that space, in that either in that bottom space or in that sudden opening and awareness that there are walls that you might want to climb.
You're present with the whole until you know some walls, and maybe now in the next moment, now is the time to climb up them. But you don't try to climb those walls until it's time to climb those walls. And by being present, that becomes apparent.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. I'm this analogy is a little tricky too because there's something in this of like at some point maybe it's like in a dream, you know, where you're in one place and then suddenly you find yourself in this other place. I think like moving through grief or hard emotion can be like that where like you feel like you're in the hole for so long and there's no walls and there's nothing else other than just darkness, you know, like or maybe it's not even darkness, maybe it's just deep and hard and whatever it is for that individual. And then, you know, a shift happens at some point. And I think the fear is that if we allow ourselves to feel the grief, to feel the anger, to feel the rage, to feel the whatever it is, the difficult experience, we're going to get stuck there and we won't be able to climb out. Climb out, meaning like it's a hole that we have to somehow climb out of. There might be like a way to add to this metaphor, like that at some point it will not be a hole anymore that you're in, that suddenly in that dreamlike way it will become somewhere else and then you'll be there and then you move from that space. So I'm getting a little bit philosophical and esoteric here, but
Yeah, so it's not linear, and it's the process. Like things shift when they shift, and it's almost like in a dream. It's almost like time is not real either. In other words, you just have the present moment, and now it's this, and this is what is, and now it's this, and this is what is, and to track it, yeah, to put it on a scale. Actually, I was looking at the stages of grief. You know, I forget the order. I think the first one's denial, right? What is it, like denial, anger, bargaining, something, and then acceptance. And that's a linear model, but I was looking through Google Images, and there are these other models that basically it's like this line that actually it's like this. You know, you go over here, spin on this, spin over here, spin over here. Acceptance. Oh no, 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 no. Back to bargaining. Oh no, no, I'm angry. Oh God, uh, and back to denial. You know, it just does what it does. It doesn't follow the chart. So, I, yeah, I get that. Yeah. So in this space, there's another interesting polarity. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Just um, so on the one hand, we have the trying to think of a name for it, but that part of ourselves is like to fix it, to get out of it, to be happy now. Let's go. You're depressed. When you're depressed, you need to get up and actually do something. Okay, so fair enough. There's a lot of truth in that. And then there's the other polarity, which I think off the cuff, if someone were listening to us, might hear the other polarity, which is like, oh, you're in a hole, just stay in the hole, and just wrap yourself up in grief and rage and just ooh. But the thing is, at least for me, and I think for others like me, is I love to juice that too. I would like to make myself suffer more, oddly. it's like maybe I don't want out of the hole, So, in other words, I'm getting something out of it, right? It's a racket to be in that hole if I let myself self pity and wallow. So, curious what your thoughts are on my theory for the polarities. One, if it's even valid to you, and two, if it is, how do you negotiate that?
Yeah, that's first of all very valid. I think that this is sort of all of it. Like the polarity is, and this is what I, have talked to, I've gotten into many a debate around this with people, where they're like, well, if you're depressed, there's things you have to do to get out. There's like action steps that you have to do because if you stay there, it could be dangerous.
Mhm.
So there's like something very true in that for a lot of people, right? And for many people, in fact. So I would never want to deny the truth in that. And there's this book, I don't know if you read this book called What Happened to You. It's written by Oprah and Bruce Perry, Dr. Bruce Perry. And it's a phenomenal book. And I'm taking it a little out of context here, but he has a model. It's all about complex and developmental trauma. And he has a model that um, it's to, instead of starting to by reasoning with the person who's having the hard experience or that's healing from trauma, we start with regulating the system and then
Mhm.
relating and then reasoning. So like
Mhm.
reasoning kind of comes last. So to pull this back, I I think that there's something to these action steps that we're speaking to, that we have to, there's something to do to get us out of the depression. Like maybe we need to go to therapy, maybe we need to exercise, maybe we need to change our diet, maybe there are things there that would be helpful. I think the secret is to make sure that we're not doing it out of order, because
Mhm.
when you're in deep anxiety and depression, the idea of having to do more is so scary and debilitating for a
Mhm.
lot of people, that action step isn't, it's not time for it yet. There needs
Yeah.
to be a space to find compassion for ourselves and for our experience. Like, it's okay that I feel this way. And
Mhm.
that can take a really long time for some people to
Mhm.
actually have that acceptance of like, it's part of my human experience that I'm experiencing this. And it is really hard and it really sucks. And I don't want to be here. And that's what is for me. And like once you're sort of in that level, I think those action steps become a lot more attractive. So I
Mhm.
think like Bruce Perry says, it's not that the cognitive models of reasoning with someone are wrong by any means. In fact, they're totally right. It's just that we've sort of been forgetting or doing out of order these steps. Like
Yeah.
regulating and relating often are sort of the first steps, and then reasoning sort of comes after that. I'm putting action steps in that category of reasoning.
Yeah. Regulating. Can you say more about that? What's that stage look like?
Regulating means something so different for everyone. And yet, I think what we're speaking to is like when the nervous system is dysregulated, like certain parts of our brain aren't working, they aren't turned on. So finding regulation um, and relating with someone, like having that experience of not of someone being with you, can be really meaningful. If you have a therapist that's saying, I don't know if you've ever seen those New York Times cartoons where it's like somebody's like laying on a train track and the train's coming and there's someone
Mm.
leaning over them going, have you tried doing more yoga? And it's like that, like
Yeah.
the joke is like, I'm strapped to a train track, I'm about to get hit, like I
Right.
can't get up and do yoga right now, right? So,
Right.
or they're already drowning and the person's going, maybe you should meditate more. And
Yeah.
so there's this sort of they're really great cartoons. So there's this sort of idea of like regulating is like letting someone know that like, yeah, it really sucks. I see
Mm.
this is really hard for you. Like,
Mm.
I'm here with you.
Mhm.
What's here now? What's happening for
Mhm.
you now? And allowing them to like go through the experience of being with themselves, of actually like feeling what's happening for them so that the emotion can clear out of their body. And I think the regulating factor in that is that you're being seen and you're being heard and you have a sense of belonging, which is like on the deepest level, I think what all humans are longing for.
To be seen and heard
And belong.
and belong. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about this client that I have, and this sense of being able to accept when something's happening to you after somebody for so long, or many people for so long, have told you that the only way to deal with it is to get rid of it.
Hmm.
So this sort of like irony in, what if we weren't trying to get rid of it, we were just trying to relate to it differently? You
Yeah.
know, like I'm speaking to like anxiety or depression. um this idea of like, what if it wasn't about trying to cancel it or trying to like delete it out of our system? Like, how do we get rid of it? And it's one of our parts, you know? So like learning to like sit with it like you would any of your parts or any of your
Hmm.
friends or any of your children, or I think there's something powerful in that. It's I've watched people have really profound shifts when they realize that it's not about getting rid of it. It's like the relief is so massive, because for so long they've been told that the only way they're going to feel better is if they get rid of the thing. And sometimes we can't get rid of it. Sometimes it's just a part of who we are. So it's more about learning to relate to it differently. And I think that that is like the thing I've seen the most massive shift in clients, is when they get
Yes.
that info. Yeah.
Great, great point. That that theme of it's not the problem, it's how we're relating to the problem. That's transformational, right? That
Totally.
that is what changes the whole ball game. Speaking of polarities, great, self improvement's great, but it's going to have the hook in it, which is that I'm not I'm not great as I am. In other words, the way that I am isn't acceptable. Um, and what's fun is the both and there, where you can be acceptable and you could use some improvement for sure.
I love this point. I'm glad you brought it up. It's
Yeah.
one of my favorite things. I think I have this like theory on like this whole idea of feeling better or being
Mm,
better. Like that there's this like elusive better.
yes.
We're all like chasing this. How do I become better? How do I do better? How do I feel better? How do I have better relationships? It's like the polarity there is huge, because of course in just like being human, we are achievers and we want to discover and innovate and be creative. And so there is that side of it. And I think that in terms of mental health, we get really stuck in that space of needing to be better. Like you
Yeah.
spoke to, there's um there's a disconnect from our inherent goodness, from like our essential goodness of just being human, being good just as we are. And this
Yes.
constant needing to change, right? Needing to fix, needing to be better, needing to change. I think it can be a trap. Not
Mm-hmm.
always, but there's definitely a lot of space there. It's a slippery slope.
The myth of becoming great is a great myth, and I love it very much. And also, and it's useful, um, and also it's partially a myth, right? In other words, it's only true because we're all believing it. And this, yeah, I know you and I have been brought up in that culture. I think most, I'd say, pretty much all of children in the United States have been brought up in that myth. It's the myth of the United States, to achieve, to become great, and but that greatness tends to own us. I think, in other words, right? One of the symptoms is should. I should be greater than I am. And also, it ultimately is false promise. And that's why we have spirituality. That's why we have people who are into religion. They finally move, they shift to God because this thing isn't ends up not working. You know, and the classic thing is like I think the archetype of that might be, the bro who making millions and millions of dollars and has a sports car and all jacked up at the gym, and not happy, and has a great Instagram following and not happy. And then the midlife crisis is where they double down on that, or you have that moment where you fall, and I think that is kind of full circle. It's its own kind of trauma. It's a spiritual trauma, right? Yeah. And so now we're present with that. Um, yeah.
Yeah, there's something interesting in that like we all there's Gabor Mate, this he's obviously
Mm-hmm.
the wisdom of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
One of my heroes, and he speaks to that, right? That there is like a wisdom in our trauma. There's a gift in our trauma, and it's this idea of how we relate to it that gives us access to that wisdom or that gift.
Yeah.
And I think for some people it happens, from traumas like having really like intense violent traumas. And for some people it's this trauma that you're speaking to, right? Where it's like, I thought this was the way of the world, was to have the car and the house and the money and the job and the following. And now I'm in this place where I have nothing that I thought I like, everything I thought I wanted is not.
Yeah.
And that can be a sort of massive transformation for people. So it's interesting just to watch that, how each person like has their own, like, nature, I almost think sort of will always pull us back to that, like, self-knowing, that like longing to know ourselves and belong and be in community and have, be connected to
Yeah.
ourselves, to grace, to others.
Mm-hmm.
And so, however you're getting pulled, or from wherever you're getting pulled, there's something there. It's one of my joys in life is listening to people's stories and watching how they've been pulled back to that. It
Uh-huh.
seems like a pattern. It seems like almost everyone I know has at some point been pulled back to that.
Yeah, I've been reading Richard Rohr. Are you familiar with that guy? Yeah. So as you know, so he's what, a Franciscan monk, right? And really gets Christianity from the mystic the mystical perspective. And yet he talks about this, like these two halves of life, which Carl Jung talks about. It's like the first half is all ego construction, and it's following the path of greatness, but it's ego greatness. And again, not to take away one iota of value out of that, it's extremely valuable. And then about halfway through, I think if you're, I'll say, lucky or fortunate or have grace, have the grace, then comes the the deconstruction of all of that, and to letting go. And that's why I brought up religion, or faith, because it's a word associated with Christianity. um, and so it's walking that road of faith, like even questioning maybe this whole thing is a myth, this whole thing that we've been a part of. And um, and I think at its best, what a great myth it is. Like what a like, in other words, it's been a game, and I love this game, at its very best. Like, I definitely don't want to throw that out or belittle it, or to suggest that we should all renounce everything. I don't believe that at all. um, but I think that it is its own limitation, and it can be transcended. it sounds like what you practice, what you're doing with trauma is very much akin to that.
We have these binary systems in our brain, right? Like we want to think in this sort of either or like it's like this or that, it's black or white, it's right or wrong, it's good or bad. And I think, those binary systems keep us really um, contracted or sort of limited. Limited is, I think, the word. Um, when we can have more of a this is true and this is true, it's expansive because not only are we expanding to this point and this point are true, we're also giving light to everything in between that. Whereas when we're in the either or, it's like limited to these 2 points and then further limited by one of them is right or wrong. And
Yeah.
so there's this sort of like my favorite coaching question. This is silly, but one of my favorite coaching questions is, and what else is true? Because so often
Yeah.
people are like really stuck in this thing of like, this is what's happening, this is what's true. And I go, yeah, okay, I hear that. That is true. And I
Yes.
hear the truth in that. And what else is true for you right now?
Yeah.
They go, what? Like, because there's this like moment of like, oh, something else could also be true right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you missed it.
Right. And even if it's something as simple as like, well, it's true that you're here with me right now in this session talking about this. Like, even if it's
Yeah.
just as simple as like, well, what else is true is that you're here right now working on
Yeah.
this. And that, even just that little inch into what else is true, into that expansion, can really like snowball for people. It can start them talking about things that bring them joy or things that are fulfilling for them or something beautiful they saw that day, and suddenly there's more that's true than just the suffering they were experiencing.
Pivoting just a little bit in the conversation, you do practice in internal family systems, and I thought that'd be a good way to get more into the mechanics of how you shift people, how you shift people's relationship with, we'll say, the pain or the suffering. And so I'll give a real quick layman's definition for the listeners on internal family systems is a psychological model for looking at ourselves, our own mind, or our psyche, as not one monolithic entity or ego, but actually a family of different parts of ourselves. And that could be the child, inner child, the protector, the mother, um, the martyr. Um, right? I guess you can name it. I'm not sure if there are rules for what the parts are, but the important thing is that it's a model that views the self as actually a organization of many different parts. How do you help people changing their relationships to the the suffering or the things that they suffer from?
Yeah, I love parts work. And I will say I haven't done like, an official IFS training, but I have found such deep connection to this model and just in general to the concept that we are more than one, that we have many parts and um, they all need to be considered and they all need to be heard. And um, there's we have such a hard time being with some of them, the same way that I think a lot of people would say that they struggle with certain family members, right? Like that they want to have a closer relationship with a sibling or a parent, but it's hard. That they're triggered by that. They're dysregulated by it. Like there's some part or some person, we could say, out in the world that kind of triggers this response. And so the way I think about our internal parts is sort of the way that I think about a family system. So I think what's most important for me about parts work is um, related to compassion. When we have compassion for somebody that is hard for us to be with. We have compassion for our lack of understanding of what they're going through. It helps us feel a little bit more willing to lean into them. And so the same with our internal parts. When I have a part that comes up and goes, I have one that I call her Randy. She spells her name with an I.
Nice.
And she's she's got to get it right all the time.
Mm,
Get it
mm,
right, Randy. And if she doesn't get it right, she yells at me, like,
mm.
and she gets really mad. She's like, "See, you did it again. You didn't get it right again. Like, now you're not going to be lovable. Now nobody's going to want to talk to you. Now you're going to be rejected from the community." Like, she's very dramatic, right? Like, she
Yep.
has all of these wild ideas of what will happen to me if I don't get everything right.
Yeah.
And so over time, working with my coach, and I'm just using this specific example of one part, but I've gotten so far with her. We've started to be able to talk. And sometimes the conversations are really hard, but but I show up for them. And it turns out that if I show up for it, then she shows up for it.
Mm,
And the more that we talk to each other, the more I understand how she's trying to keep me safe. That her intention for me is actually to be as supportive as possible, to be as protective as possible. She just doesn't have all the information. So, this is where my other parts can come on too and also talk to her and share what information they have. For
mm,
example, I have a part that I call Bliss, who's like maybe what some people would call their highest self or their healthiest self. And she knows so much about spirituality and, you know, those binary systems we were talking about kind of not being real, the illusion of needing to get it right all the time. So if she can come in and share what she knows with Randy, then together they can collaborate. They can be creative in a way that allows me to experience some relief of that, like, I need to get it right, or that voice that's so loud sometimes and intense. Oftentimes there's this sense of like, well, if I'm looking at the parts, like, who is the part of me that's looking at all of these
yeah.
parts? So I like to consider that that essential part of us, that essential goodness part of us, that some people would call it their highest self, some people would call it their healthiest self, some people just call it the self. There is a witnesser in us that holds all of these parts, that observes them and witnesses them. And there's something to be said for that part too. So I just wanted to reference that that's what I'm talking about.
Boy, reconciling those parts is has been um, difficult, um, challenging. I think is the right word because I have beaten myself over it, but it's also been the process itself is um, worth the challenge, worth the struggle. Just trying to integrate those, trying to get them to work together, and when they seem so at odds, and so
Integration is that keyword there. That's the to integrate our parts, to allow them to collaborate with each other, to know that we are more than one and we have access to information. You know, it's very limiting to think that we are only one part, because then if we're hearing a lot of self-criticism or self-judgment or self-punishment, we feel like that's our only part.
yeah,
And how devastating can that be, right? So to have this idea, like, and to start to practice when we notice the voices that create the suffering you were speaking to, right? Like, how do we use this to work with our suffering? You know, these certain parts are sort of producing a lot of suffering for us, and they don't know it. They think they're being
mm,
protective. They think they're keeping us safe. So NARM speaks to this as like protective strategies. Like, we have adaptive protective strategies that we develop as young people going through the world via a lot of developmental or complex trauma, which almost everybody has some
Hmm.
version of developmental trauma. And so to not think of that as something like, oh, something's really wrong with me and I'm broken, but more to just understand, like, oh, my nervous system is actually brilliant and created these adaptive strategies to keep me safe. So I have these parts that are like pretty socially awkward and don't know how
Hmm.
to interact with my other parts very well, but
Yeah.
they are here for a purpose. They were created for a purpose to keep me safe. And that
Yeah.
having that mentality about it or having that perspective on it can create that sense of, oh, I have compassion for that part because
Yeah.
they're trying to keep me safe. So when we can understand those strategies, understand those parts and sort of their purpose in the system, then we're able to interact with them in a different way or relate with them in a different way. And that can really create a sense of ease and peace or
Yeah.
integration among the parts.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me. So you brought up compassion, and right, that's very much in the family of acceptance and spaciousness and non-resistance and um, and yeah, it's very in my experience very to use a $2 word, agentic in finding healing. Um, and and I've noticed this with one of my friends when trying to counsel him into having compassion for himself or someone he's angry at or something. It's like it's just not there. So if you're doing parts work with someone like that, and you say, for instance, can you find compassion for them and what they did to you? And they're like, nope. What? Where do you go from there using parts work?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I don't generally, I can hear myself sometimes asking questions like, what would it be like to have more compassion for them?
Hmm.
Um, and when the answer comes out, well, I just don't, then the way that you go from there is really like, okay, like, and so what's that like to notice that there's no compassion there?
Yeah.
And just like really like kind of following the person in their process, because I think one thing that one of the greatest things I've learned in my coaching career is that it's not my agenda. It's not about what I want them to do. It's not about me
Mm.
wanting them to find compassion for the part. If that's not what's there for them, then that's not there for them.
Mm.
And there's a lot of information in the what's not there, so giving people that opportunity to go, like, okay, so I hear there's just no compassion, like you're really angry at that part, they've been an asshole to you for a long time, and you don't like them, like I hear
Yes.
that. And then just like
I,
letting that be true, so there's something in the holding people and exactly what's happening to them, because as they can experience that, like, I don't like them, as soon as they get to say that out loud,
yeah.
something shifts, right?
Yes. That's great. I admit that's not the answer I expected, and it's much better. Also because I got to be, well, it just pointed out what I do. Again, with all my spiritual past and all my wisdom, I put that in quotations. I still have an agenda. I still have an agenda with the client, or just, and my client can be just whoever's in front of me at that moment. But with this friend particularly, I have an agenda, and the agenda is for them to heal, but specifically heal the way I think they should heal. Um, Boy, am I! You were talking about. I don't remember your words for it, but my words for it are expanding the scope of what you're willing to take into account as the one who is trying to help the one in pain, right? And if I expanded that scope, it's like, well, maybe I'm off on the wrong foot immediately here, and I'm unwilling or unable to hear that because my ears are too full of already knowing. in the I know mind, and I know what this guy needs. And so yeah, it's humbling in a beautiful way. And I think there's a takeaway there too. I guess I'm thinking, like, for a listener who's not a coach or a therapist, but just a human being who has friends who do suffer, and that friend can also be themselves, right? So again, we're talking about um, coach client or therapist client dynamics, but those dynamics can be internal too. So, in other words, I can be my own therapist, or anyone listening can be their own therapist, their own coach. Um, and my takeaway from all that is, if you're with somebody and they're going through it, as I hear what you're saying, is just being in the I don't know mind about it, right? You might not know the way. Your way might not be their way. It's so slippery, isn't it? Because the mind, the ego, is so designed to be right. It's trying to solve things, which is beautiful. Uh, but yeah, it's like it's unable to be creative when it already has the answer it thinks is the answer. And then when that doesn't work, I guess, and again, full circle, we double down on it. You know, hit them harder with the wisdom or the advice.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. I'm almost like reflecting on what we were talking about earlier, and um that reasoning piece, right? When I said the regulate, relate, and then reason, and that reasoning piece, that's all about the like, well, listen, I have some wisdom for you. Like, let me reason with you about it. And so there's this like there I think there's so much space for all of this. And like that first experience with them is really about helping them to regulate and be with themselves, and like whatever you're experiencing is allowed and okay. And so the way that I've learned to do that through all my coaching certifications is that like what I've been taught is to really not have any agenda in that space, to really just be sitting with them. And like you said, it's hard for our ego. Our little minds are meaning making machines, and they want to make meaning of everything and problem solve and create patterns and formulas that we can just then apply, right? Like we want to create the formula and then go, oh, you're suffering, here's the formula, and plug that person into the formula. But we're so much more complex than that. We're not, there isn't like a one size fits all formula.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, right, it's like what you could be suffering from is the fixer, and here comes the fixer,
Well, the
right?
fixer is also one of those adaptive protective strategies. The
Mm,
fixer part is the part that says we can't let anything ever be wrong, or like
mm-hmm,
or we'll be in danger. And so we
mm-hmm,
have to make sure that if we see any kind of mess, a mess being like problem or suffering or anything like that, we have to fix it. We have to clean it up. Don't let it stay there for too long. Don't walk around in the mess. What are you thinking? Right? Like that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
fixer, is like, why would you do that?
yes,
And why, and the answer I think is because if we can get curious about the mess, we can start to understand maybe like what the pieces of it are. Like
yeah,
I'm using mess in a way that I'm not super happy about, because I think that mess has a sort of negative connotation, and I think it's more of like looking at all of our pieces, right? Like when
mm-hmm,
something is on the floor in pieces, to be able to like look at it and like walk around in it and pick up the pieces and touch them, we like learn more about ourselves. And then
yeah,
that fixer part is going, just clean it up,
yeah,
just sweep it all into the dustpan and don't look at it again.
yeah. These parts need to be heard, right? And in order to be heard, you have to at least give them the floor, which is a bit of acceptance, like, stop making them wrong.
How simple is listening, right? It seems like such a simple concept, and yet what you're speaking to, how hard it is for us to
Mm-hmm.
just sit and be with someone else and listen to them speak and say, thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
I hear you.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Because nobody, in those moments, like that is the deepest longing of those parts that are suffering, is to just be heard. And as soon as someone starts to say, well, have you thought about doing that? Or, well, one time when I was experiencing that, and suddenly the part is like, did you hear me? Were you there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think, like, on a very simple level, something that everyone can work on is really being with the people that you love or that are around you when they're struggling, and not needing to fix them, like not taking away from their experience by telling them what you think they're supposed to do. Yeah, good conversation. It's important stuff. I want people to find that. I have a mission really for people to find safety and belonging. My verb is really, I want to create spaces for people to walk into and feel safe, you know, and feel safe to have their full experience and feel safe to explore their parts and feel a sense of belonging, and that sense of connection to, I am fine and good just as I am, and there's nothing I need to change.
That was awesome. I
Thanks,
had a
Gabe.
great time.
Me too.
Yeah.